Good morning, Brian, and thank you for joining us. I've been wanting to have someone in this space now who's an expert on red light therapy for a while. So I'm excited to have this conversation. In all honesty, I've not yet woken up, and I'm honestly abusing the living daylights out of my adenosine receptors with a bunch of caffeine. So while that kicks in, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to the audience? I may have stalked you a little on your website, Instagram, in preparation for this podcast. And I know you subsequently have a bit of a story there. So I'll hand the floor over to you and we can go from there.
Of course, Rob, thank you so much for inviting me and having me on, of course. Always happy to have a chat. So my name is Brian, and I am one of the co-founders of a company in the UK, based in the UK, called Red Light Rising. And we specialize in red light therapy devices of all sorts of shapes and sizes, for all sorts of budgets, but also for all sorts of health benefits as well.
Perfect. And specifically, what led you to sort of get into this field of red lights? I mean, obviously, it's part of the biohacking community at the moment, which is exploding. But you could have gone in any number of directions. It could have been cold tubs, cold thermogenesis. You could have gotten into supplements. What specifically sort of fueled your desire to get into red light?
Well, it was exactly that. I've always been kind of exploring health and wellness, like just as a personal interest. Unfortunately, my parents were pretty sick growing up. We had a very normal, lifestyle, standard Western diet, eating a lot of processed food. And I just kind of started, becoming aware of at quite a young age, like what you do actually affects your health, which is something that, even to this day, it blows my mind that there's so many people that can still engage in like unhealthy habits, even with all the information that we have about what makes you unhealthy, and still choose to do those habits. So I was just, for whatever reason, kind of obsessed with health and wellness. And, I was working in another career. I was a trained carpenter. So I was, working away on building sites and, building furniture and doing whatever else you do. All the while I was listening to podcasts and audiobooks about health and just, self-educating. And then I discovered Bulletproof Coffee, Dave Asprey, the high-fat diet. And Dave Asprey was actually the first person that exposed me to, this practice or this subculture called biohacking, where it's all mostly very scientific based practices that you can choose to do that make you better. And like you mentioned in our conversation offline, like there's certain things that start to trend in the zeitgeist, or, along social media. For example, we've just come through the ice bath trend, where everybody and his uncle was suddenly getting into ice therapy or cold water therapy. And that's an example of biohacking. So you temporarily, jump in an ice bath and you freeze. But what you're forcing your biology to do is to become more robust, to become stronger, to become healthier, and then therefore, the long-term effect of you taking the ice bath makes you healthier.
That's hormetic stress.
Hormetic stress, exactly. So I was very interested in that stuff. I'd been going to the gym for a couple of decades at that point, so I was very familiar with the sauna. Most gyms have a sauna, so I knew it was healthy, and that's also another trending biohack, getting into saunas. And then there's intermittent fasting, and the high-fat diet or the carnivore diet, or and then part of that family of biohacks that Dave Asprey used to talk about back in the day was red light therapy. Now, I got to a point in my own journey where I was taking saunas whenever I could at the gym. I was taking cold showers or jumping in a cold river whenever I could. I was fasting very often. I was on a low-carb diet. So I was kind of starting to do all the things that I was learning about. And then it was time for red light therapy. And this was like late 2016, 2017. and you just couldn't get red light therapy in the UK at that point. Your only option was to bring something in from the States, and that was just crazy expensive. So I carried on learning about red light therapy anyway, because it turns out there's thousands and thousands of scientific research papers about red light therapy showing how it works, why it works, what it can be useful for. So like logically, I was convinced, intellectually, I was convinced of the science, of the protocol. And then myself and my business partner, James, we decided, well, we know so much about it now. Let's try and build something. Let's research what the power has to be, what the size has to be, what kind of wavelengths we can get. And we teamed up with some electrical engineers, and together we built our first few panels back in 2017. I got one, James got one, and a couple of other friends had one, and just kind of, thought nothing of it, and went on with our day. Started using red light therapy every day. And that was actually around December in 2017. I was living in London and I was depressed. I was hating my job. It was coming to a point where I was like, something massive has to change. Like, I can't continue to live like this. I didn't want to be in the UK because the weather had just, beat me to a pulp. Like, I was depressed and miserable and cold all the time. I was living in London, absolute chaos, such a busy city, doing carpentry, which I was becoming acutely aware was not good for my health. Not only are you breathing in the dust and the fumes and the chemicals, but sometimes you can be bent over all day on your hands and knees, crawling around doing stuff. The noise, it was just a very unhealthy, career path, and I needed something to change. And I'd been using my first red light therapy panel for about 2 weeks at that point, and suddenly one day I realized I was happy again. I was cheerful. I was walking down the road and I felt amazing. And I was like, could this be the red light therapy? Because one of the benefits of red light therapy is mood optimization or hormonal optimization, the feel good hormones. I was like, oh my gosh, is it working for me? I feel amazing. I feel happy. And soon after that, I started tracking my sleep, and I noticed my sleep was getting better. I started noticing that all the cuts and the scrapes that I had on my hands from being a carpenter were healing up so much faster than they normally would. My hands weren't constantly in pain. And that's when I personally realized, I'm like, oh my gosh, like everything I've been reading about with red light therapy, like it's working. It's working for me. Contacted James and a couple of the other guys, and I said, well, how's the panel going? How are you doing? And everybody said they love it. Everybody was getting slightly different benefits, but everybody said they loved it. And that's when James and I decided, like, okay, red light therapy is definitely a thing. Let's make red light therapy for the UK. And that's where Red Light Rising was born.
Yeah, well, that's an amazing story. Thank you for that. And it's great to hear that you didn't just sort of do what so many companies do, which is to sort of hop onto Alibaba or the other Temu or whatever they're called, and just find an existing panel. The fact that you were able to sort of engineer it from scratch and actually design something from the ground up, it speaks to your sort of, well, your ethics as a business owner, of course, but also your ability to create something that undoubtedly works. Sort of just while we're on that topic, what makes red light rising panels different from other panels on the market? I mean, since 2017, the market in the UK has definitely exploded. And there are a number of brands out there now, with pricing all over the place. I mean, yours, to be honest, is still relatively speaking affordable. I mean, you get panels out there that cost thousands and thousands and thousands, where yours still seem to be, that happy medium, as it were. But sort of at a panel level, what makes your products different from what else is out there?
Well, back in the day, it was really difficult to make red light therapy products. You mentioned like Alibaba and Temu. Like when we started red light therapy, there were almost no manufacturers of red light therapy. Obviously there was two companies in the States that already existed, and they have their manufacturers in China. We also manufacture in China now. Everybody does.
Of course.
But back then there was no way you couldn't buy red light therapy of Alibaba. It didn't exist. So it was really difficult to make powerful panels because you had to get, very certain parts for the inside, very certain kinds of LEDs, very certain kinds of drivers. But now, because the scene has exploded so much, of course, there's probably at least 30 factories now in China that have the ability to make red light therapy products. And from the ones that I've seen, most of them are very good now. So the technical, that's actually what I tell people. They're like, well, which company is reputable? Which one should I buy from? Which one is the best? And the truth of the matter is, like, if you're looking at the top 5 brands, including my own, when you do a web search, any of those brands are going to have panels that are good enough in terms of power, the wavelengths, and the actual dose of light you're going to get. Because it's easier to make them now, everybody or most people are making good products. But what sets ours apart right now is we have the most state-of-the-art panels on the market right now. It won't be like that for long, because as soon as someone makes something great, everybody else copies it, and then that's what's been happening to us since day one. We're back in the top spot now, but before the end of the year, I'm sure we're going to be copied. But basically, our newest panels, the Advantage panels, they have 5 wavelengths. 3 of them are near infrared light, and 2 of them are red light. There's nothing terribly special about that, because other companies have the same thing. We have a beautiful touchscreen, which makes it really easy to use, because red light therapy, on the surface, when you first get into it, it seems awfully complicated and overwhelming. And then you go on Reddit and you go on the forums or whatever, and you try to understand. Everybody's got a slightly different opinion. Everybody's saying something slightly different. So it's very confusing. So what I wanted to do, what I needed to do, was to make red light therapy as easy as possible to use. Even if you know nothing about it, you should be able to switch it on and get a good dose of red light for your needs, whatever they may be. And so with that in mind, I created what I call 6 smart modes, or 6 pre-programmed modes. So basically, when you look at the control panel or the remote, because there is a remote as well, which is another advancement. But when you look at the control panel or the remote, there's 6 different programs you can choose from: face and eyes, joint care, sports performance, wellness and mood, all over skin, and sleep. So the layman, someone who doesn't have hours and hours to research all the different nuances of how to use red light therapy, you just press the button. The device will automatically set the intensity and the wavelengths to the most optimal that we know of so far, according to the science. It'll even tell you where to stand. You just press go, and it automatically times and doses your session, and you don't have to think at all. So that is the most advanced state of red light therapy right now. But like I say, I'm sure over the next couple of months there's going to be more advancements. Technology is always moving forward, so it's pretty exciting. I hope that answers the question there.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And then just to sort of jump back onto the sort of the biohacking wagon for a second. I don't know what your thoughts are on EMF and non-native EMFs. There's a lot of science on both, and we recently had Tristan Scott on the podcast from Daylight Computer to sort of give us a fairly deep dive into that. Do you manufacture your panels taking EMFs into consideration? Do you personally think it's an issue? Of course, if you don't believe it is, that's fine. Again, like I said, there's a large amount of speculation as to whether they're an issue or not. So, but yeah, I'd love to sort of just get your thoughts there, and whether or not your panels do have a sort of a low EMF, a low ELF reading.
Yeah, so I definitely believe in EMFs, and I definitely believe in potential detrimental effects of non-native EMFs, especially. And we're always working to decrease the EMFs on our products. But there's only so much you can do, because the very nature of electricity flowing through wires and moving parts in an electrical product creates EMFs. So there's only so much you can do. So we are actually engaged with someone, a professional firm right now, to help us redesign all our panels to try get the EMFs lower. They are already quite low. And the thing is, with EMFs, they abide by the inverse square law. So if you're touching the panel, that's the highest amount of EMFs, that you're going to be in contact with. But as soon as you go an inch away, it's slashed by 10 times. Then you go 2 inches away and it's slashed by 100 times. So technically speaking, you can use red light therapy in a non-native EMF free scenario.
No, of course, and that makes total sense. And I mean, we're in the supplement space, and obviously, we have to use a certain amount of excipients in our products. We have to, I mean, we just do. Otherwise, the machines aren't able to necessarily produce the products effectively. Now, we use natural excipients when we do have to use them, and a lot of our products don't contain excipients. My thinking there, or what I'm trying to explain, sort of get to, is the fact that sometimes there just has to be a concession made. Otherwise, you can't take the supplement, you can't use the technology, and it just goes to show again that not that it goes to show anything, but that ultimately, I suppose there's a give and take, and the fact that you are going to the degrees and the steps that you are to ensure that these panels are as low EMF as possible is admirable. So thank you for that. That was refreshing. I've spoken to a lot of suppliers of these products in recent months, and most of them have, not most of them, that's not true, but one or two of them have sent me reports showing that their products emit absolutely no EMFs at all, which is, I think, almost unbelievable. I don't think they are shielded products to the point where they're actually blocking all the dirty electricity that is coming off them. So I think that's, like I said, admirable, and thank you for that.
Yeah, just to finish off on that. So I was explaining that yes, our products do have EMFs. Our battery operated products are zero EMF because it's a completely different kind of electricity. It's battery operated. So there's, for the people that are very concerned about EMFs, there's the battery operated devices, which are zero. Now, I hate to be a tattletale, but I know at least one or two major red light therapy brands that flat lie about their EMFs. Okay, and I've seen it myself on their website. And this is how you can tell if someone's lying about EMFs. Okay, on the website it says zero EMF, but it doesn't tell you what distance. Because as I was describing before, distance is crucially important with EMF. So if we disregard the distance measurement at all, then I could also lie and say on my website, zero EMF. Red light therapy, absolutely zero EMF. Because if you stand on the other side of the room and you measure it, of course it's zero EMF. I mean, even if you stand half a meter away, it's zero EMF. So the standard is, for no particular reason, the standard is to measure 6 inches from the device and then, talk about your EMFs at that level. But I would just like for people to be aware, because there's major brands that sponsor all the major influencers to sell their product, and they lie about their EMFs. They lie. They don't omit information. They don't make a mistake. They flat out lie. And then when they've been caught on social media, they don't care, because they've got millions and millions of people exposed to these influencers saying, oh, I use their product, it's the best. Just the last thing I'd like to say on the EMFs, even though I've acknowledged the EMFs in red light therapy, I don't think it's a problem. Because right now this is something I need to change. I have a Bluetooth keyboard, which has got EMFs far worse than red light therapy products. I have a Bluetooth mouse, far worse than red light, and I have a screen, I have a lamp here, I have my laptop charging, I have a walking treadmill underneath me. I'm absorbing more EMFs now than I ever would be standing in front of my red light therapy device. And the red light therapy device actually helps heal your body, whereas all this other stuff doesn't.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more again. And thank you for that. Again, it makes total sense. And I suppose I'm not surprised by what you said about some of these major brands. I suppose at the end of the day, they've got this size where, one or two sort of bad posts probably actually doesn't affect their bottom line. Obviously, I'm sure you know the issues that Element, the electrolyte brand, recently had with the findings of maltodextrin in their product. Now, personally, sort of with my background being chemistry, I don't think that's an issue. But the fact that they were sort of essentially, and I feel that Rob Wolf, who obviously co-owns the brand, is reputable and honest enough to not necessarily have done that knowingly. My point there again is that they were essentially able to sweep it under the rug, even though it made there was a bit of a song and dance about it purely because of the size of their brand. I still think it's a good product. But yeah, it just shows ultimately that when you have a business or brand that's big enough, you can sort of cut corners and get away with it, which is sadly true. But yeah, and again, just with regards to the EMF thing, I couldn't agree more. And again, the crossovers with our business are interesting. We occasionally get people who moan again about excipients, but then I sort of get back to them and say, well, are you still drinking tap water? Because you sort of have bigger worries than excipients, the micro amounts of excipients in your supplement. If you are still drinking tap water, if you are still eating pesticide-laden food, let's sort of worry about the big needle movers, and then you can worry about the excipients when you have everything else under control. So, yeah, no, I understand completely what you're saying.
I mean, I think we share a common niche, a common audience.
Yeah.
People that are going out and buying specialist supplements or specialist health technology. They like to know what they need to worry about. So
Yes.
they like to worry about the red light therapy because they want to be as healthy as possible. But then they'll put their Bluetooth headphones in, or they'll put their phone in their pocket, or they'll put their phone in their bra, and all the other things. And it's just a bit arse backwards.
Yeah, it is a bit, but that's the nature of people. They want a quick fix. Nobody really wants to sort of focus on the stuff that actually matters, which is all the basics that aren't fun, that aren't sexy, sleep, just exposure to sunlight, etc. Anyway, well, that was a tangent and a half. Thank you for that. That was actually a great way to start the conversation. But I reckon we should probably get back to red light specifically. And I think a great place to start going forwards, of course, would be to sort of focus in a bit on how it works. And I know that may sound trite, but hear me out. See, I reckon, yeah, like you've alluded to already, most people are sort of aware of the surface level benefits of red light therapy, that it can support exercise recovery, it can help with your hormones to optimize testosterone and things like that. But very few people are aware of what's sort of mechanistically going on, what's driving these changes at a cellular level. Now I know it's got to do with something called a mitochondria and a specific enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase, all of which work together to help create more ATP, or cellular energy. Beyond that, I'm not entirely sure what's going on. So would you be so kind as to educate both myself and the listeners on how red light therapy is working?
Yeah, absolutely. So red light therapy is something that's actually completely natural, even though you're standing in front of a man-made device. But what this device is doing is it's mimicking some of the healthiest parts of the sun, or some of the healthiest parts of light that come from the sun, and that is the red and near infrared light. Of course, we should discuss the sun at some point. The sun has a lot of other benefits as well. But, like in the UK, it's not always easy to get a good dose of sun every day. So red light therapy fills in those gaps very, very well. And what happens is when your body is exposed to red and near infrared light, it is actually able to absorb this light, which is very unique because it cannot absorb any other kinds of light that come from the sun. And this light can be absorbed quite deeply in the body. So it turns out all the cells of our body have mitochondria. Those mitochondria are, the energy-producing organelles inside the cell. So it's the final process of breaking down glucose or fat and oxygen, turning it into cellular energy, which will fuel the cell, fuel the tissue, and ultimately fuel you as a human being, help you get out of bed in the morning. So red and near infrared light penetrates the body. It goes quite deep. It goes into all the cells that you shine it on, in your muscles, your bones, your glands, your skin, your eyes. It even gets into your brain, and it gets absorbed by the mitochondria. Specifically, it gets absorbed by this photosensitive enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase. And when this enzyme absorbs the red and infrared light, a couple of things happen. So the first thing that it does is that it causes the enzyme to force a molecule of nitric oxide out of the cell, and this nitric oxide goes into the blood. Now, nitric oxide is a vasodilator, so it dilates the veins where your blood is flowing through and helps blood flow more smoothly, assists with detox, and assists with nutrient delivery. So that's the first thing. It increases blood flow. Now, if you can have good blood flow all over your body, you'll generally be in a pretty good state, because at least your tissues will be serviced with fresh oxygenated blood and the vitamins and the minerals, etc. The second thing that it does is, once this nitric oxide is kicked out of the electron transport chain inside the energy production cycle, that missing molecule gets replaced by an extra molecule of oxygen. So suddenly inside the cell, it now has one extra molecule of oxygen with which to create cellular energy. So it actually becomes more efficient at creating cellular energy. And once again, when the cell has more energy, things just tend to get better. The third thing that it does is, red light therapy is also an hormetic stressor, which is, we briefly touched on that earlier on. Sauna, cold plunge, fasting, weightlifting, all that stuff is hormetic stressor, and red light therapy is a hormetic stressor as well. And what that means is, it temporarily and very minutely causes a stress on your cells, and it causes the cells to release, well, first it causes a tiny release of reactive oxygen species, or free radicals. These are, poisonous little molecules that are, the waste product of energy production in the cell, amongst other things. It causes a tiny release of these reactive oxygen species, and then it stimulates itself to clean up all the reactive oxygen species. Now, if you have a lot of ROS, or free radicals, you have a lot of inflammation. So your cells will thereafter release their own natural anti-inflammatories that go into the bloodstream and circulate around your body and contribute to decreasing inflammation wherever you may have it in your body. So just to recap, first thing it does is it releases nitric oxide into the blood, increases blood flow. Number two, it stimulates an increase in cellular energy production. And number three, it stimulates an increase in the release of natural anti-inflammatories. And when you combine all of those, more blood flow, more energy, less inflammation, then that will explain why we see all these incredible changes further down the health path.
That was an amazing answer. I couldn't have structured it better myself. And I suppose if I was going to add anything, it would just be maybe a little more information about the immune system and how it sort of helps to regulate some of those those anti-inflammatory cytokines, and also how it sort of epigenetically alters the cells, so that they start producing more antioxidants through things like the activation of that NRF2 pathway, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But yeah, beyond that, thank you. That was amazing. Mitochondria, I think, are something that I've really sort of taken a kind of a deep dive into in recent years, especially having researched Dr. Robert Navio's sort of cell danger response theory. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. And also, I suppose more recently, Dr. Jack Cruse's work. To be honest, I'm still trying to figure out what he's talking about most of the time. But yeah, I'm adamant personally that there's a connection between light, cold, and mitochondrial function. However, that is definitely a deeper discussion for another day. Brian, I know your panels, well, the panels, red light rising cells, are used both red and near infrared light, something you've already touched on. But yeah, I'd like it if we could just maybe take a deeper dive into the difference there. Obviously, when I think a lot of people start to think about near infrared light, they start to think about saunas, and we've had the guys from Clearlight, specifically Johannes, to chat about the benefits of sauna. But would you sort of help sort of elucidate us, or elucidate on what on that specific topic, the difference between red light, near infrared light, and why both are important for our cells?
Yeah, so this is a question that I answer almost every day on social media or on emails. Um, it's easy to get confused between red light therapy and infrared sauna. And part of the reason why it's so easy to be confused is because red light therapy uses, like you mentioned, it uses red and near infrared light. Okay, but near infrared light is a very, we have to be very careful on how we speak about it, because near infrared light is a very narrow, defined type of infrared light. And when it comes to infrared saunas, because it shares the same word, the technical description of an infrared sauna is using far infrared light. So near infrared and far infrared light are opposite ends of the infrared spectrum, and they have very different effects on the body. So, like we touched on just then with red light therapy, red and near infrared light react in very similar ways on the body, but they do it at different levels. So, what I tell people is that red light therapy generally is good for things on the outside of your body because it doesn't go very deep. It only goes a few millimeters into the skin. So, the red light is mostly good for skin, it's good for eyes. Near infrared light is good for eyes as well, but red light is most often indicated for eyes. Hair growth, mood, and sleep are generally the territory of the red light. And the near infrared light acts in a very similar way, but it goes much deeper into the body. So it's the near infrared light that goes into the brain, it goes into the muscles, into the joints, into the bones. It goes much deeper into the body, into the organs. It does very similar things, just on different levels. So that's how I ask people to think about red light therapy. And then if we go and talk about far infrared, which is it's the most important type of light that they use in the saunas. Some saunas do have near infrared and mid infrared as well as far infrared, but it's the far infrared that's doing all the work, because far infrared penetrates your body and it doesn't get absorbed by your mitochondria. It heats up the water around your cells. So it's heating your body from the inside, which makes you sweat and then helps you with detox and relaxation and stress relief and all of that. But it's very, very different to the near infrared light in red light therapy.
Yeah, I think that's why having a panel or sauna or whatever modality you're wishing to use, that's full spectrum is important. Obviously, there are specific use cases where you maybe just want near infrared versus far infrared, but for the most part, they are obviously all important. And I think that's oftentimes where people go wrong with sort of, yeah, maybe not trying to take a shortcut, but being sort of led down the garden path with products that you see on Amazon, for example. I think a lot of people will just pick up a cheap Physiolite and think they've got their bases covered. And if those products are indeed real and not just a glorified sort of lens on top of the actual light, they are limited by the yeah, by the different types of wavelengths that they produce. I think a lot of them are just very isolated to one or the other. And really, I think that's not a bad segue into sort of now talking about natural light. And I know obviously red light has its place, and as you alluded to earlier, a lot of people I think pick up these panels because they live in a country, an environment like the UK, where you go outside and you generally are depressed by default. Of course, that's not to say that just because it's overcast that there isn't a good reason to go outside. But yeah, I think without that that actual sunshine, it's difficult to convince yourself that you're actually getting any of the benefits of being outside when it's gray and overcast and your serotonin has plummeted to the nth degree. However, would you be able to expand on why natural light is as important as just the red light? Obviously, red light is a component of natural light, but you also get your other wavelengths, your other spectrums, everything from ultraviolet to green light, UVA, UVB, all of which serve different functions in our bodies. But yeah, I'll hand that over to you, and I'm sure you can provide a more complete answer than I can. But yeah, just why natural light
Yeah.
is also important.
So something I tell my clients as well is, it's like you were talking about with your supplements. People worry about the ingredients of the supplements when there's a lot more important things to worry about that you could get done first. And sunlight is that equivalent for me. So when someone comes to me and they say, listen, I've got XYZ symptoms, I want to try red light therapy for it. The first thing I say is, are you getting outside every day? Are you getting at least some sun every day? And if you're not, that's the place to start. I would never tell anybody, oh, red light therapy is better than the sun. Don't worry about the sun, just buy my product, because that's just not the truth. The number one, the most important thing is to get natural light every day. Even if it's winter, even if it's gray, the intensity that comes from the sun and the spectrum of light, you cannot mimic anywhere. No matter how many different types of lights you have, you can do a reasonable, proximity to it, but you can never mimic the sun. And even on a cloudy day, the amount of different kind of light that is penetrating through the clouds and reaching your body has just, physiological benefits that could never be matched with a technology or a pill. If you've got the blues and the greens, which are telling your body what time of day it is. That blue and green light is going in your eyes. It's very specifically coded. So, a easy way to think about it is that, light is measured in nanometers. And it starts from, probably zero, but even maybe negative, and it goes all the way up to millions of nanometers. Okay. And as an example, the red spectrum is 600 to 700 nanometers. The near infrared spectrum is 800 to 1400 nanometers, and then the far infrared is somewhere around the 100,000s or the million nanometers. Okay, now you've got every single 1 nanometer is a slightly different color. Okay, and now if you can hold a spectrometer up to the sun, you'll see a beautiful curve of, you'll see the colors of the rainbow depicted on a curve, and each one of them is slightly more intense than the last or slightly less intense. It's just this mix of color and light that is impossible to simulate with modern technology. And every single one of those colors and types of light is a message to your body. It's a message, to your circadian rhythm, your sleep-wake cycle. It's a message to your seasonal circadian rhythms to tell your body, where you are in time. Is it time to burn fat? Is it time to store fat? Natural light is incredibly important for your immunity. The sun tells your body if there's a change of season coming and if your immunity needs to be ready for a change of season. Blood sugar, natural light affects blood sugar. It affects the amount of energy that your cells are using and therefore sucking out of your blood. Not to mention all the benefits of UV. We need UV to have healthy vitamin D levels, and you need healthy vitamin D levels to be healthy. Bone health, skin integrity, hormonal integrity, especially. A lot of things rely on vitamin D. And the easiest and the best way to make sure you're ticking all those boxes is the sun, because you get that full spectrum of light in a single session in 20 to 30 minutes a day that no amount of technology can replace, even in winter. So it's arguably more important in winter to go outside, especially if it's cold, because what I'm starting to learn about and what I'm starting to understand is that when the intensity of the sun is lower during winter and it's colder, that cold thermogenesis actually creates I don't know the full story, I'm still learning, but it creates near infrared light inside your cells on the inside of you. So that's one of the reasons why cold therapy is so important, because it forces the cells to create their own light from the inside, and your
The
body can
photoelectric
use.
effect.
Exactly. So your body can use that light as well. So even though it's lacking from the sun, if you get cold enough, you will make your own, and that will, at least keep your health better. You might not be as healthy as you could be in the summer when you're getting all that beautiful far infrared, the heat and the UV. But especially for humans in the northern hemisphere, this is the cycle that we've evolved with, and we should actually stick to. Being hot and sweaty in the summer with plenty of sun, and then being cold and a bit more huddled up, but still with natural light. It's just impossible to replace at this stage.
Yeah, no, it is. And it just shows that you can't outsmart nature at any level. Maybe you can augment it to some extent, but you definitely can't replace it. I love that you just talked about the photoelectric effect. I think it's fascinating, and there's a lot of evidence there to suggest that people who sort of, even if they are, say, and we'll use a Caucasian ethnicity as an example, but if you are, so, I mean, we both grew up in South Africa, for example, but we are both of European descent, Caucasian European descent. But because we grew up in a sunny environment, our mitochondria have developed in a way where they are now photoelectrically inclined to create less energy than we would have had we grown up in northern latitudes where there is less sunshine. So that's why, at least speculatively speaking, so many people, even if they are of Northern European descent, struggle more so to adapt to a different light environment than people who grew up in that environment, because their mitochondria are less conditioned to, and their cells as well, because it's not just mitochondria, to producing those different spectrums of light when it is cold. So yeah, it just shows how important environment can be, how important electromagnetism can be as a whole, and that's definitely something I'm not qualified to talk about, and it's very much going into the whole quantum biology discussion, which is an absolute minefield, as I'm sure you can attest to.
Yeah. I mean,
Just a
even
little.
even the people that talk about quantum biology can't explain it that anybody else can understand it. So it's like,
No, I've there's a great podcast out there. It's called Richie Flow Nutrition. I think it's uh what's his name? Cameron Borg is the host. He does an excellent job. I think he's got a background in pulmonology, and he's gotten into this quantum biology field. Tristan Scott is another excellent one for anyone who is interested in learning more about this. And then, of course, there's Jack Cruz. I think he does tend to rub people up the wrong way and take some very strong opinions. But yeah, it's definitely. I mean, people say this all the time, but I think it's definitely the next frontier of us understanding more about biology. I mean, that's like I mentioned earlier, my background's in biochem specifically, but if I was to go back and do it all over again, I would have definitely studied biophysics, because yeah, unless you sort of understand the physics behind biology, you're going to run into a bottleneck, because you can only explain so much with enzymes and proteins and lipids. There has to be a point at which you actually start to look at it from a physical, literally, standpoint and what's happening at an atomic level. Anyway, a discussion for another day, perhaps. Brian, I'd like to pivot into maybe how red light can be supportive of various health conditions. Now, obviously, yeah, supplemental red light therapy has been around for a while now. I think sort of guys like Ben Greenfield started talking about it when about 2014, 2015, around about there, and obviously talking about the bigger companies in America who we won't name. But yeah, it's sort of grown from there, and it's sort of got to the point where people are now sort of shining red light on their nether regions, and yeah, every surface and cell of the body to try and elicit some change. I'd love it if you could expand on a few areas, though, and I feel we might as well start with hormones and testosterone. Now, you've elucidated, or you've mentioned a lot of the mechanisms there that support the production of that would support the production of testosterone. So things like upregulated mitochondrial production, etc. But are there any mechanisms or reasons that red light is effective at helping to optimize sex hormone health that maybe we've not chatted about just yet?
Not really, because when you break it all down, it's doing, and this is the the important concept about red light therapy. All it's doing is upregulating, as you said, the mitochondrial activity and the cellular activity. So if it's that cell's job to produce sex hormones, or that gland's job to produce sex hormones, that's what it will do. So whether we're talking about thyroid health, or testosterone on the testicles, or the feel good hormones of a bright sunny day, they all tend to be improved in whichever direction they need to be improved in, once a more optimal cellular function is restored in the gland. So this is, it might be a bit of a bummer to say this, but no matter what benefit someone asks me, like, oh, what about pain in my knee? Will it work? Yes. Yeah. What about my sleep? Will it be good for my sleep? Yep. Yeah, it'll be good for you. And the reason is, it always comes back to this cellular optimization, mitochondrial optimization, and less inflammation. Because, as you know, if a tissue is inflamed or a body's inflamed, it cannot do its job properly. Processes and systems start to shut down, or they start to struggle to do their job. So health just gets worse and worse. But once you start to remove the inflammation, and on the one side, and then on the other side, you increase the cellular energy, regardless of what the tissue is, it starts to function better. And it starts to do what it's supposed to do. And it's funny you bring up the testosterone thing, because I've obviously been hearing about it for years and years, and I finally decided to properly take a deep dive on it. I've been researching it for the last few weeks, and trying it on myself, because the problem with my job is that I'm constantly testing new products, because I have an idea, we make a new product, and then I'll test it for a while. So I've always got all these confounding things going on. So it's impossible for me to be the N1 for anything. But I've decided to commit to testosterone. I'm shining red light only, specifically on my testicles, every morning, and then doing a couple of achy joints from sports. And then in about 3 or 4 weeks, I'll test my testosterone again and see if it's made a difference. It's subjectively made a difference. Absolutely, I feel different. I feel very, very different since I've started shining it on my testicles, but it would be nice to see it reflected in the test score as well.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it will. I mean, I've definitely got a few hypotheses as to why it's improving testosterone production. Specifically, just obviously, as you said, the mitochondria is going to fuel everything. But within the testicles themselves, you obviously have Leydig cells that are responsible for producing testosterone. And again, these cells rely specifically, as do every cell in the body, for converting cholesterol, which is the backbone of pregnenolone, which is the master neurosteroid, into testosterone. So by applying red and near-infrared light to the scrotal skin, you can again activate that cytochrome C oxidase, which then is
Not
going to
near infrared light.
not, excuse me, just the
Yeah, that's important, because so there's actually very limited studies on humans and even on animals. But whenever they've tried near infrared light, they've had negative results.
oh, have they?
So,
Okay, I was
yeah,
not aware of
so
that.
it's very important, because this is one reason why I didn't tell anybody to do it for years. Even though Ben Greenfield was doing it, he never specified what he did. Paul Saladino did it and claimed an increase in testosterone, never specified what he did. And years ago, I read that near-infrared light was bad for testicles, but it was extremely limited information, and it's still extremely limited. But all the evidence so far shows that red light is good for testicles, for the Leydig cells and all the little sperm manufacturing cells, but near-infrared light is not. So I always like to stress red light only.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense because I suppose near-infrared light is going to heat up scrotal skin potentially, and then as we know, the testes are on the outside of male physiology because they need to be cool. So yeah, that's definitely something that I didn't think of before. So thank you for that. Do you think that they have that women can benefit from the same sex hormone optimization that men can from utilizing this sort of therapy?
Yes, there's a lot of great studies about female fertility and falling pregnant with red light therapy. There was a study a few weeks ago that was trending that came out of Japan where they gave women, what was the phrase? Chronically infertile um, women that had been struggling to have babies for 9 years and not falling pregnant, and they did a short treatment of red light therapy, and a huge percentage of them fell pregnant for the first time. So it works fantastically well for women. There's a lot of things you can do. You can shine it over the reproductive organs of the woman, around the belly and around the private parts as well. But in the study in Japan, they actually shone the light on the sides of the neck, which they didn't explain why they decided to do that. Some people have said it's because of the vagus nerve, so they've helped calm the body, and that's allowed the body to fall pregnant. Other people say it was an increase of blood flow going to and from the head, which helped the ladies fall pregnant. So that's an example of how women can support their fertility hormones at least. And then for both the sexes, it's huge for the feel good hormones, mood, depression, motivation, energy, things like that. But it's actually not 100% clear why or what's happening. There's the hypothesis about bright light treatment to the face is really good for mood enhancement, which does work. Bright light treatment to the chest has been shown to be really good for testosterone. Red light therapy is bright enough to be considered bright light, and the infrared light is penetrates deep enough to optimize hormonal production. So there's definitely a few little hypotheses going on, but one thing we do know is that it consistently has been shown to help with all sorts of hormones production, fertility, thyroid, mood, testosterone.
Yeah, again, it's if I was just to sort of speculate, I would say that it's probably got to do with a lot of thyroid function too, because the moment you're in any sort of hypothyroid state, you're going to have a very down-regulated ability to regulate sex hormones at all, and you're going to have an inability for your mitochondria to produce these hormones, which is where they are again produced. So I would really put my money on improved thyroid function to put my money on improved thyroid function, sort of driving a lot of these changes. Obviously, the red light improving thyroid function. Brian, we've gotten through a lot today, but I'd sort of really love it if we could maybe also discuss some of the adjunctive therapies that you find really benefit red light therapy. I know there are a bunch out there, a lot of these so-called biohacks. But with you being the expert, I'd love to get your take on what you think is really sort of a good pairing when it comes to red light therapy. Obviously, the natural stuff is always going to be great, but yeah, just from a sort of gizmos and gadgets standpoint, what have you found to be decent combinations?
Um, I'm actually of the opposite mindset, and at this stage I think it's better to keep things isolated because it's natural for people like ourselves to try and optimize as much as we can, as quick as we can. And I don't think that's the best way to go. So I know there's a lot of people out there that are talking about either copper peptides for skin, or green tea serums for skin and red light therapy. So either doing the red light therapy, then putting the special cream on afterwards, or these special peptides on afterwards, and getting better results. All I know about that is that it's trending. So I need to do a deep dive on it. It's just another thing that I need to thoroughly look into the science. What I'm fearful of is that once I look into the science, I'll see, it's the copper peptide manufacturer that studied, that promote, that funded this study to find out how good copper peptides were. I might be wrong. It'll be great if I'm wrong. Obviously, I'm looking to learn and to make sure that I'm up to date. But that's something I still need to do a deep dive on. I know it's trending, copper peptides and green tea serums and red light therapy. It makes sense why it's supposed to work, but I need to look into the science, because everybody's quoting the same scientific resource. So that makes me think like, there's only one, and it was released by the manufacturer who's making the actual product. And then the other thing, so methylene blue is trending now as well. I'm yet to do a deep dive on it. I know, Camp A says methylene blue is the best thing under the sun. Camp B says you shouldn't do methylene blue at all because it's a nasty chemical. It's something that I still have to dive into and find out. I know red light therapy works because, I've been messing around with it for 10 years now, and I've got hundreds of thousands of clients that know it works as well. So I'm just always cautious to say like, but you've got to go buy the cream now. Just make sure you get the cream, or make sure you get this other thing to make it work, because what's it been doing for the last 10 years? But I am open to learning new information. Now, as far as combining it with other biohacks like sauna and ice bath, or fasting, things like that, I've in my own life, and I tell my clients, I think it's better to keep those separate, because each of them are hormetic stressor. They cause a specific cascade of hormones in the body and different proteins and enzymes or whatever. And if you do too many at once, or even if you just do two of them at once, you might be forcing your body to prioritize one over the other. So if you do your ice bath and then immediately jump in front of a red light, which one is going to be doing the work? Which one is your body going to respond to? Because the benefits of the ice bath last for hours and hours afterwards. The benefits of red light therapy last for hours and hours afterwards. And it's my understanding at this stage that if you do too much at once, your body has to prioritize, and it has to focus on one thing while all the others is forgotten about. It's that a classic illustration is going to sleep on a full stomach. You're going to have a terrible sleep, because for your body to sleep well, it needs to have it needs to be doing nothing else, so that the sleep hormones and all the processes that are supposed to happen during sleep can happen. But if you go and have a big meal and then jump into bed, your body's like, well, I can't sleep until I've digested all this food. So we've got to digest for a few hours. And by that time, you try and then get your deep sleep and your REM sleep, but half the night is gone. And I think it's similar for all the other, at least the physical hacks that I know of so far.
Yeah, I'd agree with that at a high level. I definitely think that people are on a bell-shaped curve, so you're going to have outliers in either extreme. I mean, I know if I eat too far away from bed, and if I go to bed even slightly hungry, I cannot sleep. I get a surge in catecholamines, my cortisol goes up, noradrenaline goes up, and that's me. I'm done. I need to have a certain amount of food, whether it's just sort of protein, fat, carbohydrate, whatever, just to help sort of satiate that those high levels of catecholamines. I think the thing about methylene blue is interesting. Again, it's going to be an electron donor specifically, which is going to help with that mitochondrial spin. So then if you pair it with the red light, you're going to have increased ATP turnover, which can be a detriment as well, especially if somebody has existing high levels of inflammation, because as you know, the process of creating energy, oxidative phosphorylation, creates a certain amount of reactive oxygen species, which can be cause excessive oxidative stress. So in someone who is already who is in a state of poor mitochondrial health, these products can be beneficial. But when you sort of aren't necessarily unhealthy, you just start pairing these sort of and stacking these modalities, you can end up doing yourself a fair amount of damage. And I know that's something that Paul Saladino has talked about recently. And I think people are naturally inclined to sort of want to crank things up to 11. And they sort of really believe in the idea that if 1+1 is great, then 1+1+1 must be even better. But the body doesn't work like that. And ultimately, you can push it to the point where you start to create more damage than not. And there is really there can be too much of a good thing. So yeah, I think those are sage words and things that the audience should definitely listen to and sort of apply to their own lives, because there really is a point at which you can overdo all of these things. I mean, the same thing applies to diet and fasting. Fasting's great. Too much fasting is also detriment and can create all sorts of hormonal dysfunction. I know this has been a lot of information for the listeners, Brian, so I'd love it if we could just maybe put it all together in a sort of a TLDR of sorts. If someone is new to red light therapy and just wants a 101, as it were, what would your advice be? I mean, apart from getting a red light therapy panel from you guys.
I mean, if they wanted a 101, if they wanted like quick hit information, my X account is the place to go. Because today, later on today, I don't know when this podcast will come out, but later on today, I'm publishing the top 15 FAQs I've been asked for the last 10 years. So if someone's brand new to red light therapy, you read that post and you're going to be ahead of 99% of people when it comes to understanding red light therapy. And then all my other posts are about slightly different aspects of red light therapy. So my intention with my X account, similar to Instagram, you know, we've kind of lost focus on Instagram a little bit and focusing more on X now. But it's basically, my intention is that it's a place where you can go and sit for half an hour, scroll through my page, and just, you know, you read 10 posts and you're going to have more information than you would get from, you know, let's say 5 hours watching YouTube videos. That's, if someone's interested in educating themselves, that's a great place to start. Another good place would just be our website, redlightrising.com. And in the bottom corner, right-hand corner of the screen, there's a WhatsApp button. You just hit that button, send your questions in, and myself or someone from the team will answer all the questions there. And that's, you know, if from an information standpoint, that's all you're going to need. Of course, you can go and look on YouTube and all that, but it's all the same information, to be honest.
Yeah, it definitely is. Thank you very much for that. I mean, you've already answered my last question now, which is where people can find you. I assume redlightrising.co.uk, is that right?
That will work, but we've recently changed it to redlightrising.com.
Perfect.
So they can do that. And then my Twitter or X is actually just my name, Brian Gohl, BryanGohl.
Perfect. Well, we'll be sure to link all of that in the show notes. Brian, this has been a fascinating conversation, and thank you for your time. I am grateful for it, and I know this discussion is going to be valuable to the listeners. So thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me, Rob.